Thank you so much for being here today. It means so much to everyone in the rare disease community to know that we have the support. And thank you for taking the time to be with us via webcast today. It's very exciting. So according to the World Health Organization, a rare disease affects 1 in 2,000 people worldwide. In order to be classified as a rare disease, it has to have that many people be affected by it or less than that. And I am speaking to you from a unique perspective today as one of those 1 in 2,000 worldwide. Before I get into the meat of my presentation, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction of myself over and above what Jasmeet has already said about me. So I strive to live each day to the fullest. I'm an adventurer, politico, foodie, and I'm a fierce advocate and fundraiser for the causes I believe in. I actually have raised over $360,000 as of this year due to some crazy fundraising that we did recently. So that has just been so amazing. Thank you. I'm really passionate about public affairs, meaningful conversation, and bringing people together under a common purpose. So today really, really resonates with me. And I recently did a survey of those closest to me and asked them to give me the 3 adjectives that they felt best described me. And they came out overwhelmingly with resilient, driven, and bright. So you know what? I'll take that. We're really proud of that. I work in communications for TD, and the global corporate citizenship team handles the philanthropy side of the bank. So really excited to be able to be giving back in my professional life as well. I also happen to live with cystic fibrosis, a life-threatening rare disease that affects all aspects of my life. And outside of this particular context today, people are usually pretty shocked when I tell them that I live with a disease that makes it extremely difficult to breathe, is fighting me harder each and every day to be able to just come here and show up, and that I look all right. That's because as humans, we live with an unconscious bias that tells us that when somebody looks well, they must be well. But across the spectrum, rare, common diseases, that isn't actually true. We go from highly visible to virtually invisible. And aside from my trademark cough, which you may hear throughout the course of this conversation this morning, it's pretty invisible on my end. And while I've always refused to be defined by my illness, it would be a lie to say that it hasn't shaped who I am today. Living with CF and a rare disease has taught me that time is limited and that everything should be celebrated and that time is really precious. So I'm here to shed light this morning on my patient journey living with CF and my struggle and fight for access to medications, which is what I'm going to focus on a lot of my presentation today. So in case you aren't familiar with what CF is, I'm going to summarize some key facts this morning. CF is a rare, common genetic disease that affects approximately 4,300 Canadians. So that's actually quite a large population for a rare disease, but it is still defined as rare. And this is because there's over 2,000 mutations associated with the illness, which makes it exceptionally individualized. People across the spectrum with CF have all different effects associated with the disease, and it makes it really hard to treat because there's so many differences. It mainly affects the lungs and the digestive system, but other complications come in, which are diseases in their own right, like diabetes, osteoporosis, and organ failure, just to name a few. To get a little bit scientific here, and I hope this crowd doesn't mind, CF occurs when the cystic fibrosis transmembrane regulator, which is a protein in our bodies, is either not made correctly or not made at all. And what this does is that protein helps maintain the balance of salt and water on surfaces in the body, such as in the lungs. So when that's not working correctly, water isn't able to hydrate surfaces like the lungs and causes a really thick, sticky mucus to develop, which creates a very welcoming environment for bacteria. And that creates ongoing and persistent infections in the lungs and elsewhere in the body. And this actually is the leading cause of death for people with cystic fibrosis, that lungs fail because of loss of function due to all of these infections in the body. So last year, people living with cystic fibrosis who were born, people who are born with CF today live approximately, through the median age of survival, about 52.3 years. So that seems like quite a decent life. But the true stat that we need to focus on right now is that for people living with CF today, the median age of death is 33.6 years old. That is way too young. And in the digestive system, CF causes fat malabsorption and vitamin malabsorption. So it makes it extremely difficult to keep your weight up and to keep yourself well and healthy to be able to fight off all of those infections. And CF affects people who live with it very differently, but what is consistent is there is no cure, and it continues to rob too many of us of our tomorrows, of our precious time on earth, and of our quality of life. So you might be wondering, how does CF affect me? Well, up until my teenage years, it was just a part of my daily existence. I knew that I took a lot of pills, 57 to be exact, every day, which include pancreatic enzymes to absorb my fat, vitamins, minerals, antibiotics, transplant anti-rejection drugs, etc. And I ate way more food than my friends just to try to gain weight. I knew I spent a lot of time at the doctor, but I never really understood up until later in my life what this would mean for me and what I would endure up until this point. And with diligent management, effective, excellent clinical care, and the best treatments and medicines available, I was doing okay. In high school, it became a bit more challenging. I was diagnosed with CF-related diabetes, which is exceptionally difficult to control, and suffered from numerous lung infections that required hospitalizations and multiple courses of IV antibiotics. And to this day, I'm convinced that some of those antibiotics are why in 2009, I was told I needed a liver transplant. So a lot of people with CF get lung transplants. I actually had a liver transplant. And after 59 days in hospital, multiple surgeries, and amazing clinical care, I'm really excited to say that in 2 weeks, I'll be celebrating 10 years since my transplant. Thank you. And while the transplant really did help my liver, the CF in my body continued to rage on. And over the last years, I've suffered from numerous exacerbations, lung infections, hospitalizations, etc. And it just keeps getting harder and harder each day. My disease is progressing. My health is deteriorating. And each and every day, CF robs me of my choices and gets more and more in the driver's seat of my life. So in order to maintain my health and slow the progression of CF, I endure a rigorous, exhaustive, and might I add, exhausting routine every day. Having CF is like having 3 full-time jobs: the mental, the physical, and the administrative. And that doesn't include the full-time job that I have today at TD. Over and above the 57 pills I mentioned, I do 3 breathing treatments before I leave the house every day, antibiotics, mucus thinners, and chest physiotherapy, and 2 more when I get home. CF-related diabetes, asthma, sinus disease, blood tests, medical appointments, massages, that's just the beginning. When an exacerbation hits, more antibiotics and even IVs and hospitalizations kick in to really stomp that out. I'm assuming many of you in the room work full-time, and just to put this into perspective, statistics show that to maintain a normal level of health with CF, or somewhat normal, it takes about the equivalent of 4 months full-time work each year. And that's work that I do for a job that I don't get paid for, and I promise you, I never applied for. I know, right? So with all of these challenges, how can the lives of people living with CF in Canada be improved? Well, in my mind, it's a 3-pronged solution. One is access to quality healthcare. And living in Canada, we're so fortunate, especially here in Toronto, to be able to go over to St. Mike's or Sick Kids if you're a kid and have some of the best medical care in the country and in North America. The other is research and development. So a lot of you in the room, clinicians, researchers, medical device companies, we need you. We need you to keep developing drugs down the pipeline, and we need that cure. But the last part that I really want to focus on for the end of my presentation today is access to medications and treatments. You're all doing such incredible work in the field, but if patients can't access the medications and treatments that are being developed, there is no use for them. And right now, that should matter to you most. While they sound similar, equality and equity are very different things. Equality implies that the same means are applied across the board no matter what the needs are, which then leads to different outcomes. Equity, however, refers to applying different means across the board to achieve like outcomes. And that's what we need for people with rare diseases. Because right now, equitable solutions would mean giving us individualized care. It would mean success for us. It would mean treating everyone differently so that we can come out with those same outcomes of access to medication for rare diseases. Right now, the drug system in Canada is broken, and patients with rare diseases are falling through the cracks. We are unable to access the medications that we need in a timely, cost-effective manner. Canada is one of the few developed countries in the world that doesn't have a rare disease strategy in place. And this is really important because this strategy would guide how we evaluate medications and how they enter the hands of patients. This now is resulting in delayed, limited, and no access at all in some cases to life-changing and life-saving medications for rare diseases across the board. We need that rare disease strategy, and we need it yesterday. Last year, I was fortunate to represent patients with rare diseases at the Ontario Stakeholders Meeting for the Committee on National Pharmacare to advocate for this strategy to be included into anything that comes out of our federal government's pharmacare plan. Currently, patients with rare diseases are facing long delays in access, denial for coverage, because the criteria doesn't meet the criteria that they use for drugs that affect millions of people, like heart disease medications. Of course, we're left with solutions where drugs are rejected due to lack of clinical evidence because the trials can't be as widespread as they would be for a medication that would affect millions. And they don't pass the cost-benefit analysis because rare disease drugs are often upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like right now, the new CF medications are over $300,000 list price, and the government refuses to pay. This is inequitable, and these realities are arguably discrimination for the people that need the health system the most. There are medicines that exist today. I don't know if any of you are familiar with what's been going on in the news. There's a new genetic modifier for CF that treats the root causes of the disease, just targets that CFTR protein that I told you before, instead of just treating the symptoms of the disease. And that could work in up to 90% of the CF population. But we can't access these drugs in Canada. There's two generations of the drug that existed before that have very, very limited access through very restrictive criteria in certain provinces under public plans and under very restrictive private insurance plans. But for the most part, Canadians cannot access these drugs. And a new one that just was approved by the FDA isn't even getting submitted by the drug company to Health Canada for approval because they haven't been able to get their previous generations approved in Canada. Very few people can access these drugs. I am not one of these people. Meanwhile, we watch countries like the US, Australia, Denmark, Sweden, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Scotland, and the UK, and I can name more, fund these drugs for people living with rare diseases. Are the lives of people with CF in Canada less important to our government than they are to those? I can't help but ask myself that question every day. Canadians with CF and other rare diseases should not have to get sicker before action is taken, but we are, and I am. I am but one of countless examples of the growing struggle to survive. So today, I want to leave you with one last thing. I want to thank you for all the work that you've done so far and for all the progress that's been made for rare diseases in Canada. But I want to challenge you to not just be a researcher, but to be a champion for access, to not just be at a medical device company, to not just be a doctor, but a champion to actually get these drugs in the hands of who need it most. And I want to just challenge you to be part of our fight. Join our fight for equitable access. Join our fight for equitable health outcomes for people with rare diseases in Canada and around the world. Thank you.